Alright, so hopefully everybody can hear okay on this. This is the pieces from the clutch on Blanca the Work Truck. The pressure plate here, if you can see the areas where it's kind of bluish purple, that's discoloration from heat, and probably doesn't show up in this video too well, but there's some pretty good heat cracks around the center of the wear surface, and pretty uneven surface. And if you move it over here, I had to replace the clutch release fork because everything was so worn that the release fork was actually rubbing up against the fingers of the spring on the pressure plate on the other side and grinding into it, which was probably the noise I was getting. After you drive it for a while, the pedal would get real stiff and there'd be a creaking noise coming out of the bell housing. And that brings us over here to the disc, which, if you can see, some of the rivets were good and shiny there because they were starting to rub into the flywheel and the pressure plate. So didn't get any shots of the flywheel before it was machined, but there were some pretty significant heat cracks in the pressure plate, in the flywheel, and it was in pretty rough shape. So original clutch on it. Don't know how well it was driven before I owned the truck, but made it to 148,000 miles and nursed it along in questionable shape for a while. So anyway, that's how it went down. It was long overdue, and ended up having to replace the starter as well because it decided to crap out on me once it was put back in. Also the original starter, so not bad for almost 20 years and 148,000 miles. Anyway, just thought y'all might like to see that. And for those of you that have never seen any of these components, you can see this clutch friction disc. That's what actually bites in. This here is your throw out or release bearing that presses up against when you push on the pedal. Release fork. It's driven by the clutch slave cylinder, and then the pressure plate, which is what actually clamps that disc up against the flywheel so that everything hooks up nice and tight when you don't want the clutch to be released. This is what's left of the pilot bearing, and it actually was in good shape. It got damaged when I was pulling it out. Normally inside of here there are needle bearings, and the input shaft of the transmission goes through that, and what that does is when you've got the clutch pedal depressed and the clutch is released, it allows the engine to the crankshaft to still spin around that stopped input shaft, so it keeps things from binding up. This is another thing that's interesting about these ZF transmissions that Ford use. It's the pivot for the clutch release fork. It clips into the bell housing of the trans, and then on this side here, that would actually normally ride right there like that. And the damn thing's plastic. It's the goofiest thing I've ever seen, but needless to say, there wasn't any way, even if it had survived, that I was going to reuse a 19-year-old piece of plastic that's that important to the function of the clutch. So definitely not something that I was going to take a chance with. One other kind of interesting thing too is you can see on the back side here, this is the side opposite where the release fork was rubbing into the pressure plate. See where it's blue and discolored there? That's heat from that thing. So this thing was a ticking time bomb that was, probably not far from leaving me on the side of the road, and we can't have the work truck on the side of the road. So anyway, long overdue. Clutch works way better now. Went ahead and replaced the master and slave at the same time just because they were original, and I figured it was better just to go ahead and invest in everything and not have any problems if possible. So anyway, thanks for watching.